Good afternoon, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of Perth Kinross Council's Scrutiny and Performance Committee this Wednesday, the 21st of September. I am joined on the platform here by Alistair Bailey, Vice Convener of the Committee, and on my right I have Kirsten Molly from Committee Services and Lisa Simpson, the Council's Head of Legal and Governance. We have other officers in attendance at the back, and we're pleased to welcome today the Chief Executives and some of the board members of our arm's length external organisations. I'll say that out in full just once. From now on, it's ALIOs. So from Culture Perth and Kinross, from Live Active Leisure, and from Horse Cross Arts. And we can do introductions when we get to that point on the agenda. Just to remind councillors and officers in the chambers, both in the chambers and online, to use the chat box to attract either my attention or the Vice Convener's attention. That'll just help us to make sure that everyone has their say and we deal with people one at a time and in order. I'll ask the clerk to the committee to advise of any apologies and ask members who are joining from online to confirm that they're present, so that this is clear in the recording of the meeting and for the accuracy of the minute. Clerk.
Thank you. Yes, Convener, we have an apology from Councillor Shires with Councillor Ahern substituting. In the chambers this afternoon, we have Councillor Ahern, Bailey, Councillors Allen, Drysdale, Forbes, Massey, Smith and Stewart. Members online, when I call out your name, could you please confirm you're present? Councillor Carr.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Frampton.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Robertson.
Present.
Thank you. All members are present, Convener.
Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from elected members in respect of the business on the agenda before us today? Bailey Ahern.
Thank you. I've got a non-financial interest in item 5.3 as a Director of Culture, Perth and Kinross.
Thank you. Any more? Okay. Item 3 on the agenda is the minute of the meeting of this committee of the 8th of June for approval. Can we agree that minute? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 4 is the outstanding business statement. Who's going to address that?
So yes, so we have quite a few actions that have already been completed. We first of all we have the issue from on Business Gateway from the 29th of November, which is not completed. Is Barbara online?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
My apologies, Convener and committee. I'm just back from leave, and unfortunately David Littlejohn is on leave as well, but we'll take this action and expedite it immediately David returns.
Thank you.
Then we also have the action on a forward planner, which I think is underway, and hopefully more of an update will be brought back to the next meeting. We also have the action on for the Vice Convener to provide a detailed update on scrutiny and performance review into the local action partnership funding during emergency powers periods, including terms of reference and methodology for appointing members to the review subcommittee. I think this will be brought back as a briefing note and should be completed for the next meeting. And then the last action still to be completed is a methodology to be constructed in terms of closing out of improvement actions raised in BMIPs. So again, I think a meeting will be held with relevant officers, and we hope to bring back a further update to the next meeting.
Thank you very much, Clark. If there are no questions or comments on the outstanding business statement, we'll move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is the update from our ALIOs. I wonder if I can ask if we can vary the order of presentations with the committee's indulgence to hear Culture, Perth and Kinross first, then Live Active Leisure and then Horsecross. Is that all right with everybody? Yep. Great. Thank you very much. We have with us Helen Smout, the Chief Executive of Culture, Perth and Kinross. Next to her, we've got Paul Cromwell, the Chief Executive of Live Active Leisure. And on the end of the row there, we've got Nick Williams, who is the Chief Executive of Horsecross Arts. And we have some of the board members of those organisations joining us as well. We have Lord Canool, David McElhose, and online I think we have James Findlay. Have I missed anybody out? No, okay. Can I then invite Helen Smout, Chief Executive of Culture, Perth and Kinross, to deliver the presentation to us?
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Committee. It's nice to see people face to face for the first time in a long time. I welcome the opportunity to speak to you, but I will keep it brief as I'm aware you have several presentations and a long agenda this afternoon. I'm happy to take any questions following this or even after the committee, if anybody has that. If I could have the next slide, please. No, I think that might be the wrong presentation, sorry. I'll maybe just talk to, sorry. That's the wrong presentation. I will, begging the committee's forgiveness, I will reissue another presentation, but I will talk to that if that's okay, apologies for that. So talking a bit about engagement and how we engage with our communities and the information that we use in order to help us do that and the transparency around that we have. So working with communities is very much our day job, whether that be working with communities of interest to design, develop and deliver new services, such as our recent seed library where we worked with the Perth organic growers, whether that's a geographic community, working with the community in Muirton to ensure that their stories and histories are reflected in our collections. That project called Once Upon a Time in the Muirton is very much worth checking out if anybody's passing North End Community Campus. There are a number of drivers for that work, and hopefully you don't have the slides, so bear with me, I'll just read those out. So we have a strategic operating plan which sets out our key objectives and outcomes. Those are informed by our articles of association as a charity. We've got team and project plans, but we use a variety of data, including survey data, demographics, feedback and comments, evaluation, visitor data, performance indicators, and sector trends analysis. And we use Acorn to help segment our audiences to understand them better. That data drives improvement and it drives change. We also take a lot of time to gather the views of our users. We're very much customer focused in that regard. At the moment, we're undertaking a library review. As part of that, we've been gathering the views of our users through a survey which has had more than 1,300 responses, of which around 142 were from non-users. We use that data and evidence to help us make judgments about our plans, the projects that we want to take forward, and to make the data more meaningful. So, for example, as part of the survey, we managed to understand better the length of the average service visit. Oh, there we go. Slide is there in front of you. So the survey visit, so in terms of people visiting the library is about 30 minutes or less. So it's a very quick visit into a library. So we can have a very small window of opportunity to engage with our customers during that length of visit. Similarly, we know that most people visiting a library visit on their own or with children. It doesn't tend to be something that couples do or small groups do. So again, we can change how we engage with people. We can change how we lay out the survey, making sure that there is space for individuals to sit comfortably on their own. If we want to just move on to the next slide, thank you. Through review of that data and evidence on a regular basis, we can make sure that we are reporting not just to yourselves as a committee and a council as part of our contract monitoring. Transparency is also important to us. As any organisation, we seek to share as much information as we can, being mindful to avoid overloading the public with meaningless or impenetrable data. So we will feed back to customers and we'll engage with customers about what we are finding out about our performance, and we will engage with the sort of statutory organisations that scrutinise what we do. These take place on 4 key fronts: yourselves and within the council, other departments, Companies House. We also have Oscar and our individual funders. So we're constantly making reports, feeding back what we find out in terms of data, performance, evaluation, and making sure that we're keeping everybody up to date with that. We also undertake a full external financial and governance audit each year. We publish our trustee reports, annual accounts, performance information, and health and safety reports. Our website is overdue for review, and if we just move on to the next slide, please. There's a bad screenshot there, which just shows our governance section on the website that we currently have. What we're aware is that that's not necessarily very consumer facing at the moment. There's a lot of information and a lot of documents that can be accessed. We do publish as much as we can. So we are redoing our website over the course of the next 6 months to try and make that much more navigable and much more easy for people to access the information about the organisation and about our performance in particular that they may want to do. We're also subject, like all of the ALIOs, to freedom of information requests, of which we receive about an average of 10 a year. And very often I have to say these are about the number of books that we issue, what types of things people are reading, and come from publishers who want to make sure that they're responding to the reading. But that information from the freedom of information request we will be publishing going forward, but we certainly make all of that discoverable. So hopefully going forward we can continue to provide information, use the information that we have, and currently engage and focus our resources in times of challenging financial circumstances to make sure that we have the greatest impact we can on our communities. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mrs. Smout. I'll now, what we'll do is we'll go through all of the presentations and then open it up to questions from members for all of the ALIOs. We did obviously give the ALIOs a bit of a steer in terms of the areas to focus on, so it should be all be in a certain sort of thematic arrangement. Mr. Paul Cromwell, Chief Executive of Live Active Leisure.
Thank you. Again, I've got a few slides to go through, but again, I'll try and keep timings tight because I appreciate you've got a tight schedule this afternoon. Could we have the presentation up, please? If I could move to the first slide, please. Okay, thank you. I won't go through all of the individual bullet points, but we'll cover them as part of my presentation. So the company's vision is to be the provider of choice for the people of Perth and Kinross to live physically active lives. We consider that the services that we provide are an extension of the health service, and we seek to engage and deliver activities and services to our communities across every life stage. We are a customer-facing service organisation, and therefore there is a core need for all of our teams to be able to engage with customers, clients, volunteers, and we recruit staff not only based on skills and qualifications, but also on key personal qualities and attitudes. These essential requirements are further developed as part of our core training and induction programme. As a customer-facing organisation, it is also a core requirement that continuous improvement is part of our makeup. Customer income is vital to the financial health of the organisation, and as a discretionary spend, we have to compete for the leisure pound. So it is essential that we continue to develop our services, products, venues, ensuring that we provide value for money and a great experience. Developing funding partnerships is also vital to the services we deliver. Meeting the requirements and specifications of any agreement successfully provides the basis for continuing to secure funding for our communities moving forward. We therefore engage in a myriad of ways with customers, clients, funders, partners across the services and communities we deliver, and have developed innovative approaches to blending funding streams to maximise opportunities, and which also provide a more robust and effective delivery model. The following isn't exhaustive, provides some key areas of customer and partner engagement. Our Active Schools team committed to increasing the number and diversity of children and young people taking part in school and physical activity before, during and after school, with the key aim of developing the service and of course to get new or inactive pupils active. Partnership steering groups with PKC and a range of other partners are in place to develop this. Many schools look to achieve the Sports Scotland School Sport Award, part of which includes evidence of pupils' voice. The team supports schools to establish and oversee school sport committees, and for secondary schools this includes the Young Ambassador programme. Reducing barriers to activity and participation is an ongoing improvement challenge. This year the team are focused on Kit for All across all secondary schools and promotion of the Young Scot card, which provides free public transport. Active Schools of course have a presence on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, as one would expect these days in terms of engaging with young people. The community sport team engage in a range of areas, including surveying local clubs on training needs, which will in turn inform the development of the coach education calendars and courses we deliver. The sports team meet and support community sports hubs throughout P&K, engagement with clubs and individual community members around how we can develop sport within local areas. Our team engage with national governing bodies, with local clubs to identify priority actions for specific sports. And as part of our Club Excellence accreditation scheme, clubs make the sports development team aware of their 3 priorities for the year, and this shapes how we tailor and bespoke the support we provide. Project and activity evaluations are completed, feedback from parents to help make improvements for programmed activity. And yet again, we use Twitter, Facebook, and we're very active in terms of social media, regular posts to signpost, to celebrate, to inform and to promote. Our community wellbeing team have strong connection with local partners, relationships with social prescribers, local health professionals, help to identify gaps and priorities, development of new classes, community wards, etc. Surveys, questionnaires as part of specific interventions to determine improvements in functional capacity and mobility. These help shape what happens next for each individual customer, but also how we can improve the overall service offer. Our venues, we're the universal offer. We have points of view cards. We have you said and we did feedback posts, questionnaires, surveys. There are established sports-specific user groups, including curling, bowling and swimming development. Trying to provide that elusive balanced programme can only be achieved by regular and ongoing dialogue with customers, clubs and event organisers. Our role is also to stimulate demand, and we have an excellent track record in introducing exciting and innovative classes for our customers. And these decisions are based on wider industry research and customer insight. We also know that improved digital experience is a key customer area, booking and paying online, and the use of apps are on a development and improvement cycle. Moving on to next slide, please. Accountability. Live Active Leisure is an independent charitable organisation and is therefore subject to the requirements of OSCA, the Scottish Charity Regulator. The board is made up of 11 directors, 3 are elected members who are nominated by Perth and Kinross Council, and 8 who are independent. Our independent members are volunteers. They have been recruited from our communities. They have skills and experience across a range of business sector areas and all have a passion for sport, health and wellbeing. Our company director's information is available online, as is our senior management team contact information. The company are subject to the PKC Scrutiny and Accountability Framework, submission of government statements, key performance information and indicators, and attending client meetings. From a public perspective, the publication area of the company's website has provided information for a number of years and includes board minutes, key company policies including HR and health and safety policies, and key guiding documents such as the Articles of Association and the company's financial regulations. Again, similar to CPK, it's been recognised that this area requires redevelopment and improvement and is currently undergoing significant review to provide a more accessible and up-to-date area for the publication of information. Beyond this information, the company also posts the company accounts, company annual achievement record, reports, external accreditations, and a range of other news and information about the company. Next slide, please. We are all well aware of the challenges that we face at this time, and whilst I have mentioned continuous improvement in relation to service enhancements, we have also delivered continuous improvement in relation to financial performance and delivered efficiencies over the last decade. This challenge, of course, grows ever more difficult, and everyone is acutely aware of the range of issues which we will now face. It is therefore good timing that the new PKC sports strategy is being developed and involves wide-scale engagement with local communities, clubs and organisations. The evidence that is gathered from this project is likely to shape future priorities and commissioning arrangements. It is also vital that the company's business plan reflects not only the challenges but also the opportunities that we anticipate over the next few years, which of course include 2 new venues in Blairgowrie and PH2O in Perth. The development of the company's business plan is currently ongoing and will be essential in helping to secure and signpost the direction to a sustainable, integrated sport, health and wellbeing offer throughout Perth and Kinross. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Cromwell. Lastly, we have Mr. Nick Williams, Chief Executive of Horsecross Arts.
Good afternoon, everybody. There we go. You can tell that used to unmuting at a click of a button on a computer instead. Good afternoon. It's good to see everyone in person. For those that are here, I have a short presentation for that. Can we move on straight to the first content slide? Thanks. So as entertainment venues, we rely on our communities and audiences a great deal to buy tickets and engage with what we do. And post-pandemic, we've undertaken quite a major refocus on how we look at our communities and who they are. We see these as audiences, we see these as wider customers, we see them as participants, we see them as artists and arts organisations, producers, people who, and also those that we do not engage with currently. In the refocusing on our communities, we have started to talk to them about what it is that we do, how we do it, and what's for them, as it were. This takes a long time for an organisation like Horsecross. We are a little bit like an oil tanker. Our planning cycles are such that it takes a year to 18 months to make major change, and we're only about 6 months into that conversation, having been dealing with the effects of the pandemic and the rescheduling of a very large number of shows during the 18-month closure period. But what we have done is institute a range of feedback mechanisms and look at the sources of data that we have to understand and inform our decision making moving forward. In terms of feedback, we really are looking at it from 3 perspectives. One of them is from the community need focus, and I'll talk a moment about our learning and engagement activity, which has refocused on community needs. We then look at how that drives and crosses over into the onstage programme. And then we have a very large amount of data that we interrogate to inform our decision making on programming, pricing and promotion. We work with a large number of outside partners, and I'll come back to that in a second. Move on to the next slide, please. Over the last 2.5 years, we really have reinvented our programme of engagement with communities all over Perth and Kinross, and we presented this at the April Scrutiny Committee meeting. It really is based on a set of long-term partnerships now, and we work with those partners to consult with communities as to what the need is and how arts-led interventions might support that need or meet that need. The overriding principle is that the partnership will be ongoing and the projects might evolve and change. We see a very strong example of this with our Gig on a Truck project, which started during the pandemic working with care homes, which has taken on a life of its own, really, as we've been passed from care home to care home and community setting to community setting, winning the Chamber of Commerce Business Star Award last year and coming back this year with an enhanced and revised partnership approach with a number of key communities. Similarly, with our youth theatre, we asked them what they wanted to do next, and they said they wanted to make a show. So we've put them on the main stage in March this year, and we will continue to do that as an annual project in direct response to what they want. If we move on to the next slide, we really see the sort of the main onstage program as the core area that perhaps needed a bit of community focus and engagement. So we started running focus groups, both first in March and then in June, looking at things like the program, the cafe, and our operations. We've instituted consistent qualitative surveying post-performance, and we're getting a very high response rate to those, which is giving us a set of really clear steers from audience members as to what they like and what they don't like in terms of what we do, and allowing us to respond. We have continued to work in partnership with other organisations in our programming as well, and we were fortunate enough to win an award for Oliver Emanuel's play I Am Tiger, which had a major youth mental health aspect, and it shows the crossover into our learning and engagement activity in the main stage programme, as well as our show All When the Saints, which gathered stories from St Johnstone fans all over Perth and Kinross and more widely, and put those stories on stage in June. It's very much an idea that these are community venues ultimately, and we should be telling local stories as much as we bring in the entertainment side of what we do. If we move on to the next slide. So as you might imagine, with a major data set in our box office, we can interrogate that to tell us an awful lot about what it is that we're doing, who we're reaching, and how we need to target the market and where we need to work harder. We do know through the data interrogation and the survey and what our audiences think. They think we're good value. They think that on the whole, they like what we do. We have been able to more effectively target areas where we were not necessarily reaching as well previously, using less print, making an important intervention on the environmental front. Our learning and engagement work, as I said, is focusing on working with key communities where we have had previously lower engagement, and we're starting to see an increase in ticket sales as a result from those areas. And we've run a whole range of focus groups on what the new offer for the Perth Theatre Cafe will be when that comes to reopen at the very beginning of the next month. As I said, we have an awful lot of data to interrogate, but actually it's not quick or easy for us to respond to some of this because of our planning type scales. Just a final word then on transparency. Like the other ALIOs, we are a charity. We publish a whole range of information on our websites and respond to freedom of information requests, of which we get very few. Again, as the other ALIOs said, we have information that is scattered somewhat at the moment, and we are looking at a new website for next year, funds willing, which hopefully will consolidate this information in a much more easy to obtain location. I would say also we have been regular attenders at Scrutiny Committee over the last couple of years, as well as having observers from both PKC and Creative Scotland who receive both monthly management accounts, quarterly accounts and board papers as a part of a wider transparency framework, really. Like the other ALIOs, our board is made up of local members of the community who are recruited for their skills, and as some members will remember, this is a new board that has been formed since early 2020. I realise I have rushed through that because I know that we are fairly short on time this afternoon, but I'm very happy to answer any questions.
And thank you, Mr. Cromwell. Mr. Williams, sorry, apologies. So I'd now invite any questions from the members. Councillor Forbes.
Can't figure out which button to press here. It was just about the libraries, and I wondered if library use is generally going up or generally going down.
Thank you. Library use has been reasonably steady with a small rate of decline up to the point of pandemic, about 6% between 2000 year on year between 2015-16, 2019-20. What we haven't seen is a return to library use after the pandemic. We're now currently sitting at around 46% of pre-pandemic use in libraries. Part of that is due to the age profile of many of our users who are still cautious about engaging in services. What we are seeing is an increase in joining of families and people who are not traditional library users who are coming to us saying that they appreciate the opportunity to save some money by getting their books free and by using the Wi-Fi and the internet. So there is a bit of a shift, but we are not back to pre-pandemic usage as yet.
Thanks for that. So is some of that perhaps because people are downloading books from your digital service, or have you accommodated that in your figures?
That's included in those figures. The usage of our digital offer did increase during the pandemic, and we saw a definite spike, particularly during the first lockdown. However, it still accounts for just round about 12% of the overall borrowing that happens. So even on the current figures, around 88% are still seeking physical books. When we undertook the survey that I talked about in the presentation, it was very clear that around 88% again of people visit the library for book borrowing, use the library for book borrowing, and they see the digital offer as an added bonus, but not necessarily their core use.
Thank you. Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, convener. I had one question really, and looking for maybe a couple of sentences from each of the alios, if I may. I just wondered to what and we've heard a bit in the presentations, but just to drill down a little bit more, to what degree are each of the three organisations able, resourced, and equipped to take their services into more rural communities, and how much of their services is of necessity based at the venues from which they operate?
Thank you. Who'd like to go first? Just because I can see you.
Just go down the row. So thank you. So we have 17 venues across Perth and Kinross at the moment. So our service is not just focused, although the largest and headquarter activity certainly happens in Perth. We are visible. We have a mobile library service that currently visits 102 stops every fortnight across the region, from Glenlyon in the north down to Milnathort. There is a broad range of engagement, particularly through our libraries. We're very conscious that whilst we have two of the larger museum venues in Perth, we also have Ailith Museum, and we work quite closely with the community in Ailith in terms of the content of that. So we do try very hard to ensure that our work is not just Perth centric, although some of our largest assets are based in Perth. So we work as hard as we can to engage as many people outside of Perth as possible.
There's obviously different areas in terms of what we deliver. So we obviously have 13 venues across P&K that we either own and operate or operate on behalf of the authority. We also have a community sport team. We also have a community wellbeing team, and we have our active schools team. So we have some work there that's specifically about really supporting people that've got health inequalities. Now, you know, I consider almost everything that we do as part of that essential makeup of that health service that we provide across all of these different areas. So we are resourced. We are trying to recover. Obviously, we're going through recovery at the same time we're going through everything else that's happening in the wider society. We are resourced. Staff and resources are a challenge, which I think are for everybody else at the moment. Financial resources will become a challenge. But in terms of our teams trying to recover, we are back delivering the services that we were providing pre-COVID in large. Our recovery rate is around about the 81 to 85% in terms of where we are pre-COVID, which is slightly higher than the national research would indicate for similar organisations. So we have responded. We are focusing our efforts. We're having to focus resources to make sure that they make the biggest impact. But we are back delivering the essential health services that we believe our communities require.
I suppose we're slightly different to the others in that we are two city centre based buildings, although as I said, in terms of our learning and engagement programme, it is very much out and about across all of Perth and Kinross. We went to 63 locations with the gig on a truck last summer, a few less this summer. I think we're only at about 20. But that programme does have longer term partnerships bedded in Milnerthorpe, Kinross, Blairgowrie, and we took primary schools kids from Grantley and Comrie primary schools to COP26 in the autumn last year as a part of the Little Amal project. One of the things that we know is that those that say that they are not able to attend or don't attend very regularly find transport into Perth Centre the problem of an evening especially. We know that our audiences that do come nearly all drive, and so there's a clear issue there around those that cannot drive or do not wish to drive, especially at the darker times of the year. The other thing I would say is that we are also looking to work in partnership with some of the other arts organisations that are round and about within the area. So we're working on a pilot project to support ticketing, especially for Burnham Arts and Strathern Arts in Crieff, with a view that that might become a much bigger project across all of the region over time, because I think it is possible for us to share some of the resources and technologies that we have to support others more widely across Perth and Kinross.
Thank you. Vice Convener Bailey.
Thank you, Convener. So actually part of my question has been asked. I was going to ask each of the ALIOs to what extent have you recovered post-COVID? So to what level have your audiences or usage returned to pre-COVID levels? So thank you to the two who answered that in the course of the previous discussion. So I suppose the question therefore is for Horsecross really, in terms of ticket sales or attendance of events, roughly what percentage are you recovered now we're at the end of the first summer season unfettered pretty much by COVID restrictions? Thank you.
Thank you. So we're doing pretty well on that front, actually. I think it's quite difficult to compare like with like because the programming cycle has shifted and we're not comparing the same against each other. But certainly we think that we're at about 85 or 90% of pre-COVID levels audiences wise. We budgeted prudently for this year on the ticket income and the attendance side, and we think we might exceed what we had budgeted based on current trajectories. You know, there are key shows which do extremely well. So the comedy program is doing incredibly well. Things like Alan Cumming in his performance of Burn did incredibly well at the theatre. You know, Panto is selling very well, as you might imagine. And in terms of the wider benchmarking that we do with colleagues across the sector, we're actually performing a bit better than the benchmark, with sort of 36% higher revenues than that benchmarking group. I say all of this with caution, however, because, you know, we are seeing very late booking patterns, very different booking patterns to what we previously had, and people are very much responding at the last minute. So it makes projecting quite difficult because audience behaviour has changed post-COVID. And similarly, you know, there will be things that come along and they suddenly take off based on one Facebook post, and it's sort of a nice surprise when that happens. But it is happening more and more, and the way in which people behave has shifted, it seems.
Councillor Allen, you who wanted to come in with a comment.
Yeah, thank you for the three reports. My comments are probably going to be more based on culture, Perth and Kinross than the other two. However, I think my comment is basically just to say that over the coming months, as it gets colder and cost of living crisis bites in, people will be looking for a warm place. Have the libraries given some consideration to that and how it might affect them?
Yes, thank you. It is definitely a topic of conversation and discussion, not just within our service, but across Scotland as to how libraries might respond. We have always been a neutral space in communities, one which offers a welcome to anybody. We will definitely be looking to see whether we can offer a warm welcome this winter, and we are engaging with colleagues in the community learning and development team as to how we might coordinate efforts around that as plans begin to take shape. Certainly within our buildings, we're already making sure that information about health, well-being, advice, guidance, information and signposting to all sorts of things which might support individuals with cost of living crisis, including things like debt advice and guidance, that's available in the libraries as well. And we'll continue to build on that through our partnerships and our links with other organisations.
Excellent, thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you very much. My question were, how is the changeover in bells from Rodney's going? I was very, very impressed with it, and I just hope it's really going to succeed. My other question would be, or inquiry would be, for the concert hall. I always find when I walk past it that when the sun's shining on it, it's very difficult to see any of the advertising or any of the shows that are coming up. I always wonder if I could make it a wee bit Broadway sort of style and get some real flashy lights out and let's see what's going on, because when I do pass the back of the theatre, it does catch my eye as to what's going on. So thank you.
Mr. Cromwell first and then Ms. Williams.
Hi there, sorry. Yes, in terms of bells, it's been a great success is the launch of the new fitness facilities, and anybody that's obviously had the opportunity to go to bells and see the redevelopment in terms of the studios that have been created now and the destination fitness gym that we've created, which is an outstanding facility for the whole of Perth. And certainly the feedback we've had from customers across every life stage as well. I have to say we've had a significant take up in terms of young people between 12 and 15, significant engagement. And whilst I don't have the exact figures on me, I'm more than happy to pass them on to the committee afterwards. But we offered a 7-day pass, just to give you an indication, when we launched the gym, and over 910 7-day passes were issued over a 5-week period. So it's been incredibly positive. The feedback that we've had, the comments that we've received have been absolutely excellent. And now we're actually starting to go into the season. Obviously, summer tends not to be the time that people would tend to go to the fitness gym for obvious reasons. So now we're actually moving into the season, into September, October. Then I think it's only we can only expect it to go from strength to strength. Thank you.
There we go. We are looking at how we display everything in the front of the concert hall at the moment. One of the lovely things about having a glass building that it lets lots of light in as well, and does save on the heating because it warms it up in the foyer. But that poster array is due for an overhaul in full. I think we will start to mix in some use of vinyls on the outside as well. One of the interesting things in one of our research projects recently, we looked at electronic screens and the cost of running them, and they're quite expensive. But actually, I think we are talking with colleagues in the council about an LED display that will go above the main door that will allow us to put a clearer message on what's going on over time. That's a medium-term project because it's a prototype piece of kit, but we are very much looking at how we present what's going on in that building at the moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, and sorry, Mr. Williams, another question for yourself. I've often wondered, and now's an opportunity to ask, what currently in 2022, post-pandemic and all the rest of it, what percentage of days of the year are each of the concert hall and the theatre in use?
I don't have the exact figures to hand, I'm afraid. The autumn season is traditionally our busiest, and we pretty much have something on 6 days a week there in the concert hall all the way through the autumn. The theatre is slightly different because theatre shows take longer to put into a space and sit there for longer. And so, you know, when it comes to Panto, actually, there is 2 weeks that builds that set on stage, which the building is in use, but it may not be publicly seen to be in use in that way. And what we try and do is balance out the work that's in the Joe Knight studio during those moments. You know, we have a pretty heavy program year round, and we're on course for the sort of 500 events this year, which is pretty much where we were pre-pandemic, actually. I can't off the top of my head tell you days, but I can look into that if you like. Sure.
Anybody else, or I've got a couple? Okay. Just in terms of returning to the issue of the sort of public transparency, accountability, governance, and so on, do any of you have your board meetings public?
Not at this time, no. No.
Or thought about having them online or anything like that?
I think, as you can possibly imagine, Horsecross having gone through some previous difficulty, there have been moments where I think it's probably not appropriate to have some of those meetings in public forum.
I would say I've got a lot of experience of boards of public companies and things. It's quite important that the board is able to have frank discussions in private, but that the minutes and the output of the board and the board pack, certain elements of it, should be public, and that's the basis on which we've been trying to run our board, particularly over the issues of surrounding what will be an enormous change management of the arrival of the new museum in City Hall. I think quite a bit of what we discussed would be quite unhelpful if there was a public airing somehow. So it's quite a delicate thing to line to walk, and it's something which is very much at the front of the minds of various members of the board, some of whom are sitting in this room and another of whom is online. But it's an important issue you raise.
Thanks, Lord Knoll. And the other question I had was, it's probably easiest to start by asking Live Active Leisure, because Mr. Cromwell, during your presentation, you specifically mentioned how you regarded Live Active Leisure as an extension of the health service, and certainly, you know, you were talking about your sport and well-being programs up there. It was really just to ask how much of your footfall is directed, for example, from GPs or health services have referred patients into you for, you know, rehabilitation or so on, and then widening it out to the other two alleos as well. Do you have any figures or measurements on how many, you know, whether any social prescribers have put people, for example, have put people your way, or you know, any of the groups or activities that you run, people have been put your way by their GPs or their health services or similar?
If I can just answer the one about the doctors, GPs. We have a GP on our board now. He's just come on the last 12 months, and it's very helpful to have him there because he's able to discuss points that on the various subjects you mentioned, and he's also got a family which assists as well in his understanding of what we can do as a board and all the services we provide. But I'll ask Paul to answer the questions on the wider issue, the ongoing one. But thank you.
Again, I'm happy to furnish you with the figures after the meeting. I don't have them with me. Obviously, activity referral is something that we've, as an industry, have done for 30 years, and obviously that's changing. It's increasing with social prescribing. So there's a scalability opportunity as well as challenge there, and that's something that my team work very closely with a range of health practitioners beyond just GPs in terms of how we engage. We also have a self-referral as well, of course, so that it's not just limited to being prescribed our activities by a health professional, and it's something that we're really trying to focus on, so that we historically, I suppose, it was a fairly formal offer in terms of what a GP referral and activity referral looked like in terms of a programme. What we're trying to now look at is something that's much more bespoke and tailored to individuals' needs and health issues, and where we provide a touch point and then continue that programme where we have key touch points. But their activity might change significantly from being in the gym historically to actually going swimming, or it might be other activities that are more suitable to the individual. So it's an area very much that we are focused on, because we realise that there is going to be an increase with the range of health professionals now that can refer, and it's something that our team are very active to.
Sorry, within the libraries, we do have books on prescription. What I would say is we don't have a lot of throughput from GPs, and that has certainly been reduced following the pandemic as well. I think their focus has been tied to other things. We do work where less directly with the NHS and more with community-based groups that are supporting health and wellbeing. So we'll link in with Centre of Inclusive Living or Perth Autism or other groups, particularly Tayside Mental Health Trust, and support a lot of our activities. So when we're delivering projects, we tend to deliver in partnership all the time and try and work with that. So they will refer clients and people into those projects. We focus a lot as well on self-directed care. So we provide a lot of information about health conditions. We have reading lists about health. We encourage, we have health and wellbeing areas in our larger libraries where we brought together a whole range of materials that enable and support people to find out more about managing their own conditions or those of family members. So we try and encourage that information side of things is something that we can provide quite well. We're also working with Perth Prison on a project which is about reading for wellbeing and improving mental health within the prison population through use of reading. That's a project which we brought in European funding for. So that hopefully will be a model that can be rolled out to other prison services across Scotland.
Like Helen, we don't have very much direct prescribing from GPs, and I think the arts is often a little bit behind in these sorts of areas of social prescribing. But we do work very strongly in partnership with a number of organisations that we co-convene projects with. So we do 3 projects with Tayside Arts NHS Trust, one which is about breathing and singing, and 2 which are movement for people with long-term physical issues, one for Parkinson's and one for MS. And then we work in partnership with Mindspace on a writing project, and it is for them, they refer on to that project participants who they think will benefit, and we work closely with the Lighthouse on the I Am Tiger show, which I mentioned earlier as the Teenage Mental Health Project. I suppose it's one of those things at the moment, as I said earlier, we're looking at very much the long-term partnerships, and the projects beneath them will change and evolve. I'd also note that I think from our general surveying of audiences, there is a positive well-being outcome from attending live performance, whatever the genre, and audiences are consistently reporting a positive experience for their general well-being, which is probably not the most robust data, but it is a good outcome to have for any arts organisation that you're contributing more than just pure entertainment.
Thanks very much for all those answers. That's really helpful. Certainly, I think it would be useful to get the numbers afterwards, Mr. Cromwell. And indeed, from all of you, in terms of how many there how many usages or referrals or self-referrals there are, as you said, not necessarily from GPs. And I think that certainly with my other hat as Vice Chair of the board for the Health and Social Care Partnership, it's really encouraging to hear that. I think it may be an area which we would like to explore further in future in terms of, digging a bit down into the numbers and seeing, how many drop out, what the dropout rate is, and how you engage people and so on. But that's very helpful. Are there any other questions from the committee or comments? Councillor Drysdale.
Thanks, Convener. I just wanted to pick up on something you said, Convener, earlier about openness and transparency in relation to board meetings and so on. And I take on board the points made about some confidential matters that that are discussed, obviously, and highly sensitive matters that are discussed. But if we apply the same principle as the local authority, there is the capacity, subject to the agreement of the head of legal, for matters to be considered as reserved business. And so my comment would be I would like to see progress made in making as much as possible of your board meetings publicly viewable. If that's, I don't know if that's an ambition that the rest of the committee shares, but it's certainly my view.
Thank you. Do any of the rest of the committee wish to indicate whether they share Councillor Drysdale's ambition? No. Okay. Well, we'll take silence as tacit agreement then. Okay. If there are no other questions or comments, I'd like to thank the chief executives and board members of our three arm's length external organisations very much for their attendance and for their presentations and for answering our questions. I'm going to call a short recess now until 3:05 to allow the board members and chief executives to depart. Thank you very much. That's the recess concluded. Hopefully everybody's back online and we all are here in the chamber. So we will now proceed to item 6 on the agenda, which is our Freedom of Information Performance Report for 21-22. The report was prepared by Gillian Walker, the Council's Statutory Data Protection Officer. Unfortunately, she's unavailable to join the committee today, so the report will be introduced by Lisa Simpson, our Head of Legal and Governance Services.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, the Data Protection Officer arranged her holidays around one of the many multiple previous versions of the Council timetable and sends her apologies. So she's for this and the next paper you have me subbing for the Data Protection Officer. This is the performance report for our Freedom of Information requests and applications. The numbers in terms of this year are up by 13%, but that isn't surprising given that the previous year we did have resources diverted in terms of our emergency response to the pandemic. So the Council received 1,365 requests, the majority of which were from single applicants, but there were requests, more than 10, made by a number of individuals, and one individual is responsible for 38 of the requests and 15 of the subsequent 33 reviews. In terms of reviews, it's a relatively small number, approximately 2% asked for a review of the information provided, and a smaller percentage of that actually went on to ask for a further consideration by the SPSO, as they are entitled to do within the framework, but none of these resulted in any directions to the Council in any way, shape or form, and the performance would indicate a satisfactory process for managing freedom of information requests and a high level of satisfaction at the interaction with the Council in relation to these matters. I'm happy to take any questions from councillors, but I think in terms of scrutiny and assurance, you can be assured that there is a robust process in place for dealing with FOI requests. In terms of the pre-pandemic target for performance within the statutory timescales, that was 95%. There clearly was a dip during 21-22, where performance dropped within 88%, down to 88%. But I would advise that we are now getting back up to pre-pandemic levels of performance, because we've had some additional resources into the team in that period of time. So we're confident that the process is robust and that the satisfaction in terms of customers is adequate and acceptable.
Thank you, Mrs Simpson. Councillor Drysdale.
Thanks, Convener. I have two questions. Do you want me to come ask two? Is okay? Yeah, right, that's fine. My first question was really just how does this local authority's performance compare with other local authorities, is question one. And question two is, you mentioned in your report there about the single individual with 38 requests. Is there a point at which there's a maximum? Is there, because I can foresee that an individual who may have a reason for so doing could paralyse the organisation by asking repeated requests. Thanks.
In terms of benchmarking with our peers across the authority, the performance of Perth and Kinross's small team is very good. In terms of that, the problem that arises from multiple applications, this was one of the reasons why the statutory timescales couldn't be complied with, because we received multiple reviews at the same time and had to deal with them sequentially. So otherwise no one else would have been able to have any of theirs processed. So that did have a knock-on impact in terms of timescale. People can ask for extensive information, and a lot of the requests, particularly from that requester, was for extensive information, which took up a lot of time, not just within our team, but for multiple officers across the council. So it technically almost did bring the work of that to a halt almost in terms of other applications, which is why we had to make the pragmatic decision to deal with some of them sequentially. But the impact of that, of course, it did impact on our ability to comply with the 28-day timescales in terms of each request. 20 days, sorry. 28 days is the next report.
Just to follow up, there isn't any provision therefore in the legislation for an individual and a maximum number of requests in a year or anything like that?
There's nothing prescribed in terms of maximum number of requests, but we can take some sort of action or take some pragmatic decisions in terms of managing unreasonable behaviours. And when you're abusing or perceived to be abusing a policy, it would be open to us to exercise that in terms of managing unreasonable demands. But in terms of the FOI legislation, there's nothing specific, and indeed nothing was exercised here. It just had an impact on performance overall.
Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Convener. The question I'm going to ask is actually to Ms Simpson. We've had the FOI legislation in place for quite some time, and I understand and I appreciate it's very expensive to operate. My question to you is there a better way of doing this? If you had a clean piece of paper and asked to design the system, is this the one we would have?
I don't think that's a question that I can answer, A, because I don't have a blank piece of paper, and B, as the monitoring officer, I need to operate within the law. So the law as it stands, we are trying to be as effective and as efficient as possible. This is a very small team that manages both this and data protection. It's the same people who manage both of these requests, and it's very important that the public get access to information. There is no, we take transparency and openness very seriously, and where possible, we work to provide as much information as possible. It is time consuming because information and data is held in various media and forms depending on how far back we need to go. So it's not an easy or cumbersome process, but I don't think there's an easier, cumbersome or less cumbersome alternative at the moment. So it is what it is, and we fully support people's right to access their information, and will continue to process these requests as effectively and efficiently as we can.
I appreciate your response, but this is the Scrutiny and Performance Committee, and one of our tasks is to try and look at how we do things and see if there's better ways to do it, and that was the reason for my question.
I think that in terms of some of the steps that we can take in terms of information storage and collection going forward, we have introduced as part of our statutory records management function the electronic document management system. So as things move over, we also have a process of back scanning. So as we digitise information, that might make things easier to find. But people can make requests for all sorts of information, and they're all held in different places. They all relate to different subjects or different issues. You literally can be asked anything that is within the public task. So where we can, we make things as efficient as possible.
Okay, thanks very much indeed.
Councillor Forbes.
I've got 3 questions, Convener. Do you want them all together, or will I come back round the cycle? Thanks. Lisa, do you have a cost per FOI?
No. And the reason we don't have that is because FOIs, some can be dealt with very, very simply. If it's information that's held in the one place, we know where to find it. We can do that in minutes, in half an hour. There's others that could take days and days and days to process because it's information that's held by different officers across different services, all relating to different things. So no, there's not a cost per FOI as such.
Do you publish anywhere FOIs that have already been received in the hope that anyone who's looking for the same information could go and find it if it had been requested by someone else?
Where we have requests for information that we can then make public, you know, if it's information, we actually do we're quite proactive in trying to make as much information available on the web so that we can simply direct people to that. So if we get a number of requests that are about the same sort of thing, then what we will look to do is collate that, make that public so that we then don't have to respond to FOI requests. We simply signpost them to either our website or some other website or some other source of information. So we do that. That's a proactive part of it, that we try and publish as much information and put that into the public domain to try and minimise the number of FOIs. But you don't know what you're going to get asked, and you literally can't get asked anything.
So if I put in a request for how many teachers are left-handed, for example, would you consider, okay, it's bizarre, but somebody in the future might want to know that. Could you just stick it on the website so that I could just search the website and find that? Not that I have any interest in that, obviously, myself.
I think you would get our answer that in terms of the legislation, that information is currently not held and so therefore does not have to be disclosed to you, because we do not record left-handedness.
Okay, so that was not the best example, but you get the gist of my point, that if someone asks an FY question, if that was on the internet, then someone else could just go and find it and save you looking for it again. My last question, you'll be pleased to know, is the target of 95%, is that set by government or is that set internally? And if I know we're at 80, put my specs on, I think 88%, if we get to 95 and everything's comfortable, would you push that target up the way? Is it within your gift?
That's a target that we set. That's a target that we set. So if we were consistently meeting that target, then we would be looking to push that. And as we look to try and digitise information, streamline processes, or have other additional resources, then we would be looking to push that target. So that's within our gift.
Vice Convener Bailey.
Thank you. And if I may, I'd like to add some colour to the previous response about the proactive disclosure that shortly after we came out of the COVID emergency powers, I spoke with officers about whether the minutes from the executive officer and member sounding boards would be subject to FOI, because I suspected that the press would be interested in those, and the answer was a resounding yes. And that's what resulted in those being published. So in that case, it's a good example of when we were able to cut out the middleman with FOI and actually publish information ahead of the press having to come to us to ask for it. So that does happen in practice. My question on this paper is related to 4.16 and the reviews and appeals. And I think there's two good news stories in there that mustn't get lost in my question. And one good news story is that reviews are relatively rare. The other bit of good news is that when reviews are pushed further, that we've not had any instruction from the higher authority. However, my question is, we do have a situation where more than half of reviews are upheld. So therefore, is that a concern for us as a council, or is there another mechanic in the background there that explains the reason as to why more than half of reviews we do change our original decision? Thank you.
There's not been anything particular that has raised an issue around any kind of system or process failure. Some may just be human error. Some may be that there's been a misunderstanding in terms of what the person's actually been looking for. Officers do work with requesters to try and bottom out exactly what it is that they are looking for. But sometimes when they get information, they realise it wasn't quite that, and it might have been something else that they were really looking for. So that then results, we just treat that as a review and gather in other information. But there's not been anything that has raised any concerns for me or for the data protection officer who also manages this part of the team, that there is any sort of systemic or process failure in terms of the operational across the council. Sometimes it's really just difficulty in collating and corralling all of the necessary information that's held in so many different places. But as I say, as we are moving now to back scanning historical information, and we have an EDMS now for current information, sometimes we're hoping that the collation of that may be easier.
Thank you.
Have we got any more questions? Okay. Have we got any comments or feedback to provide? The only thing that I've picked up so far, I think that might be a suggestion. Councillor Forbes was about the cost per FOI. Don't know if you've got any feedback or comments on that.
I just thought, yeah, not particularly important. I just thought it would be quite interesting. And I get what Lisa says, that one might take a few seconds and cost a few pennies, but one could cost thousands. Well, no, there's a limit, isn't there, on a cost that we're willing to go to? Is it £600 or something like that? But is it right? Yeah, yeah. So I guess it's a simple exercise. You take the cost of running the service and divide it by the number of requests you get. I'm not precious about it. Was it just interested, really?
Okay, thanks, Councillor Forbes. Any other comments, feedback? Okay, so can we note as recommended in 2.1 and 2.2 that performance is improving back in line with pre-pandemic levels, and that the number of requests for review remain a small percentage overall? Agreed? Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the Data Protection Compliance Report for 21-22. Discussion on this and the following item, the Corporate Workforce Plan 21 to 23 Progress Report, will be led by Vice Convener Bailey.
Thank you. So we're on to item 7 then, which is the Data Protection Compliance Report for the year 21-22, and I understand Lisa Simpson is going to introduce the report.
Thank you, Vice Convener. This is the Data Protection Compliance Report, as you can see, for the period 21 to 22. This is a report that requires to be provided by the Data Protection Officer for the Council. The Data Protection Officer is a statutory officer of the Council. They are not responsible for ensuring data protection compliance, but for monitoring, advising and providing support and technical and professional guidance. In the opinion of the Data Protection Officer, they are satisfied that the Council has a robust process in place and that we can provide adequate assurance as regards our handling of data protection, data access queries. In terms of the number of breaches that were referred to the Data Protection Officer, that was 166. No, sorry, that wasn't 166. That would scare you if you thought it was 166. Sorry. I've now closed my report. Sorry? It's 134. That's what it is. Thank you, Mrs. Donaldson from the wings. It was 134 which were referred to the data protection and reported as a breach. I would like to put that into context. That is in terms of the millions of transactions that involve personal data involving the Council over a period of a year. So they are talking about a very, very small number. In terms of the ability and the reference and the willingness of services to report breaches, there has been no concern by the Data Protection Officer in that regard. Officers and services come forward immediately. Any breaches are noticed or and are immediately rectified. Most of the breaches, the nature of the breaches, have either been through email error or unauthorised disclosure, which might mean someone's name's not been redacted from information that has been released. Nothing again in terms of the information in relation to the breaches that would indicate any systemic or procedural problem. Most of the breaches would appear to relate to human error. I think it's important for the committee to be aware, however, that the nature of the type of subject access requests have changed quite dramatically this year. There has been a 19% increase in the number of complex requests, and that's primarily due to the historical child abuse redress scheme, with lots of people looking to access their own historical care files, some of which predate not the last reorganisation but even the local government reorganisation before. So collating and gathering and finding some of these files has proven quite problematic, and a lot of work needs to go into careful consideration of every page of those files and very sensitive and careful redaction to make sure that other people's personal data is not disclosed as part of that process. In terms of the breaches, the Data Protection Officer has to apply a risk-based approach to determine what constitutes a breach that requires to be reported on to the Information Commissioner's Office. In terms of all the breaches referred to her, she did do that process and referred 9 on to the Data Protection, to the Information Commissioner's Office. Of those 9, in terms of 5 of those cases, the Information Commissioner was satisfied that we'd already taken all of the necessary action and they had no further comment to make. In terms of 4, there were some very minor recommendations made which have all been actioned and completed to the satisfaction of the Data Protection Officer. So in terms of assurance to the Scrutiny Committee, the management and process for handling subject access requests and also for managing sensitive and personal information is appropriate and adequate across the organisation. We will continue to support and work with services to provide further guidance and advice where necessary and training where necessary. The services have all indicated a willingness to look to improve. There is no complacency on the part of any officer in the organisation in relation to this, because every data breach is taken very seriously. But I hope that the Scrutiny and Performance Committee can take some reassurance from the statistics that are reported today and the fact that we will continue to work towards continually improving that performance going forward.
Thank you very much, Lisa Simpson, for that introduction. So we'll go across to questions. We've got a couple on the chat already. So to you, Bailey Ahern, for your questions. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. And thank you for that, Lisa. And you've gone through all the numbers that I was going to mention. So thank you for doing that. Yes, 134 data breaches is very low compared to the amount we go, but each data breach is a failure in process, a failure in training, etc. And especially in terms of the 9 that were reported onto the ICO. My question, it's a 2-part question because it will lead into the next question is, are these down to a lack of training or a lack of processes, or were they deliberate breaches? And if it's down to training, under GDPR and obviously the UK Privacy Act of 2018 and several other regulations, there is a mandatory requirement to do yearly data protection training. And how is that monitored? Are people who fall outside of that training cycle, are they restricted their access to data until they've done that training? Or are they and how are they chased up? Because most of the training is done online on a self-help basis.
I think in terms of the fact that basically all staff are dealing with personal information all of the time, and there is we do offer online training, and we're developing e-modules and we're looking to that. I think it would be fair to say that there hasn't been the resources to perhaps offer the extent of training that we would like to do, but it's more important that we actually process subject access requests and provide guidance and try and do our best to ensure that there is compliance across the whole organisation. I would say that in terms of the breaches, I don't think it was a lack of training that would be the issue. I think it's been human error in most cases. Someone's just, not redacted a name, but it's, depending on the nature and circumstances of the individuals involved in the case, the data protection officer takes a risk-based approach to determining whether or not there is a potential impact there. Now, there hasn't been any cases that has resulted in any actual harm or any injury in terms of that, but most of it has been, it's simply been human error, and it's been an unauthorised disclosure of information to the wrong person, usually through failure to redact something. But you have to bear in mind that in a number of cases they may be going through very extensive files, and it might be 1 or 2 pages out of several hundred pages that's simply been missed, and that's one of the difficulties of our obligations under that. It's a painstaking job, and people make mistakes, and that, I would say, that has been the issue. Had it been anything that was indicating a training need, then we would provide that. And where we've got new teams, where maybe someone who isn't that experienced has made a mistake, has made an error like that, we have gone out and worked with those individual teams or individual service SMTs who have all been more than willing to take on board our advice and guidance and any additional bespoke training that we've offered individuals or a particular team.
Thank you. I appreciate the training. When I was a data protection officer, I only had 45 employees to deal with, and I used to do a 1 session. And I'm not saying you can get thousands of people around one table to do a data protection seminar so they keep up to date. Where it does become an issue is where somebody may have missed their training and then they become involved in a data breach. That then becomes a completely different issue because they are potentially haven't done the training or have forgotten the training. But that's probably another matter. My other question was, with regards to the numbers of subject access requests, it says in here that the majority of them were down for the historical child abuse cases. How many were from people looking to see how their particular issue was dealt with by the council with regards to COVID, maybe down to benefits or to help or to whatever, but how much of that was down to COVID?
I don't have that. I don't have that level of detail, unfortunately, Councillor Hearn. I'm not sure whether we would capture that breakdown. The ones that the bit about the historical abuse, that was accountable for the 19% increase. But the point I was making in terms of the relevance, I clearly didn't make myself clear, was that was one of the ones that are out with the 28 days because they fall within that extended period because they're particularly complex. I'm not sure how far we break down because we don't actually have a system as such for recording this type of information in terms of it. A lot of it's still done kind of manually collated on databases, etc. But I will pick that up, and if there's any sort of indication of figures like that, I'm more than happy to circulate that. And indeed, the data protection officer did volunteer that if the scrutiny committee would like a brief presentation from her, she would be more than happy to come along and speak to you.
Yeah, it may well incorporate FOIs as well, but there would be certainly a number of certainly people that I know have either done an FOI or a request under data protection for the information that was held by the council because they felt they weren't being treated properly by the council and they wanted to see what information was held. And it was purely down to the way that they were being dealt with through the COVID process. So it would be interesting.
I will pick that up with the data protection officer. We'll put that as an action. And as I say, if the committee would like a brief presentation from her, she's more than happy to do that.
Thank you. And I think it would be interesting indeed to hear from the data protection officer about the that point, as well as what the ongoing training looks like for staff members. So that would be appreciated. And thank you for the questioning, Bailey Ahern. So Councillor Allen, please proceed with your question.
Thank you, Vice Convener and Lisa. Sorry for homing in on 5.6 again, but it's regarding the breaches that we've just spoken about there. You say that 4 of the breaches were due to unauthorised access of personal information. That could be a concern. Is that unauthorised access by our staff, or is it unauthorised provision of information to external bodies?
I think that will have been unauthorised access by staff, which will all have been dealt with under separate processes and procedures.
I understand that there are complexities and there will be confidentialities that you can't break, and I wouldn't expect you to do that. Given that it all seems very good, one thing I will say is if we've all got 4 problem concerns out of Perth and Kinross Council over the last year, it's a very good performance, but 4 is still 4 that we could have done without. Have we had any instance where we've had to remove personnel because of a mistake or a release of information?
I actually am not aware of any stats on that. That's not something that I actually am privy to at this particular moment in time, because they would be dealt with under other processes and procedures. And bearing in mind that the data protection officer is a unique and autonomous post herself, so wouldn't necessarily report that to me. I think I sound like I'm being evasive, but I don't know.
I'm purely asking under the auspices of scrutiny and trying to get to the bottom of, do we have major concerns about these 4 breaches, or are you happy and they have gone away?
I've got a very helpful wave from my HR colleague in the back, so I'm going to hand this matter over to a woman who, unlike me, does know.
Not able to speak about the 4 because I don't know that level of detail, but I can assure councillors that individuals where there have been serious breaches of data, we have taken disciplinary action against them, and that may well have led to their removal from that post.
Thank you. The last thing I want to hear about is people being removed from their post, but it's just important that we understand that these are being dealt with, and if people see people being dealt with properly as a consequence, then it's a good standard to have. Thank you.
I think it would be fair to say that the data protection officer does take data breach very seriously, and the organisation takes significant data breach very seriously.
Great, thank you all. Next, Councillor Drysdale with your questions.
I no longer have 2 questions, we've got 3 if that's okay. And just following on from Councillor Allen's point there, and without wishing to overlabour the point, I just wondered if the unauthorised accesses instances, appreciating only 4, whether any of them were deemed to be at least partly due to a failure of our internal IT systems, which should obviously prevent unauthorised access.
The systems itself may not, there will be permissible access. They may well have access to all data in that system, in which case they've looked up people they really shouldn't have looked up, or done something along those lines potentially in terms of a system. So you can't block out all the access for all of the people in some of the systems that hold sensitive data. So they've got permission to access it for the purpose of their work, and they may well have used it for other purposes.
Okay, thanks. Another question I had was around email error. Now, we've all sent and received emails that we wish we hadn't sent or received. No names here. However, for the figures here are extraordinarily low. I mean, what degree of confidence can we take that these breaches are being reported? These inadvertent breaches are being reported?
I think we could actually take quite a lot of assurance from the fact that breaches are being reported. Services report things really promptly. Services even report and go, I'm not sure if this is a breach, but I think I might have done something. Is it a breach? Do I have to tell you, do I have to report this to you? And I think people are now much more familiar with the policy and the procedures and an understanding of the importance of data and the importance of protecting personal data. So I think there is a good understanding across the organisation of what our responsibilities are in terms of handling data. We don't have any evidence that suggests that data breaches have been withheld, not reported, covered up, minimised. We haven't had that. We haven't had any direct experience of that. Now, we obviously don't know what we don't know, but this is all about making sure that even if errors happen and breaches do occur, that we then try to act very quickly to minimise and mitigate the impact of that. And our experience has been that officers across the council are happy to work with the data protection officer in that regard. And I think that officers take the management of people's data very seriously. I think they understand the policy. I think they understand very well the importance of data. I think they work very hard to handle the data properly and in accordance with the policy. But nobody's perfect and mistakes occur. And where there have been what we consider a serious breach, very strong action has been taken, as we've heard from other officers. So I think you should take some assurance that the policy is robust, the procedures are robust, and people are committed to handling data professionally, technically, and in line with the law.
Thank you. And my final question was just the same question I asked in the previous paper, which is, and I think I know the answer to this one, but how do we compare with other local authorities?
We compare very well with other local authorities.
Do we have any statistics on that, perhaps?
I'll add that to the data protection officer's presentation gig.
Anything else, Councillor Drysdale? Okay. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you. Section 5.3, and you kind of talked about this already, Lisa. So a total of 134 data breaches is gone down from last year, which is good. And you've already said, and it says here that that's a tiny portion of the many millions of interactions. Is there any other way we could measure that? And, for example, comparing ourselves to other local authorities, which has just been mentioned.
There will be benchmarking information out there, so I can raise that with the data protection officer.
Just my thought on this is that, I mean, I totally agree with you. I don't have any real concerns about this, and I'm sure there are many millions of interactions, and therefore it's impossible, I guess, to see a comparison between the 134 data breaches against however many million, because we don't really know how many million they are. If those figures were smaller and more precise, it would be easy to see it. So I was just wondering if there was another way to look at that. And it's reassuring to see them going down the way. And do you happen to know if they're always going down the way, or has it been a bit of an up and down blip?
I think, well, there was a bit of an anomaly probably about three years ago where there appeared to be a spike in the number of breaches, but that was because we'd done a big training campaign and embedded the policy, and people were much more familiar with what constituted a breach. So we had far more breaches reported because people were recognising, oh, that's probably a technical data breach, I better tell the data protection officer. So we had a situation where it spiked, and now what we've got is something that is steadily coming down, but the numbers are very, very small in terms of, I mean, it is millions of transaction and handling personal data. If you think of the number of officers, the number of services, the number of constituents that we deal with, and multiply them by many, many times over the course of a year, you're talking millions of transactions involving personal data.
Yeah, I don't doubt that at all, Lisa, so thanks. My second question, and it's really curiosity, I guess, is why education and children's services, why is that so high? Is that purely the number of transactions, or is there a reason for that?
It's probably the number of staff officers involved in it, the number of pupils that are involved in it, the number of interactions that a school has with a family or with other professionals. It really is just down to the nature of the business. And again, that number for that service is very, very low, and not something that the data protection officer thinks is a cause for any concern or worry.
Great, thank you. And to Councillor Massey for your question, please.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Of the 134 instances that have been recorded, how does the DPO receive this information? Who reports these breaches to her? Is it the individuals themselves, or is it departments that report the breaches to the data protection officer?
It could be people who have realised that their information has been wrongly shared or wrongly copied, but in most cases it's usually staff themselves that have noticed they've sent something out with all of the emails being a CC instead of a BCC, or that something hasn't, there's been a query from a member of the public, and that's highlighted the fact that they've forgotten to redact something. So most of it is coming from, I think, staff and officers themselves that realise the breach, or the person whose information has been breached.
Thank you. And then Convener, I believe you have a question.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I had a discussion on data protection with the data protection officer a while ago. And it transpired that there was no written procedure to follow when an officer wants to access someone's email account. The recommendation was that that be discussed with relevant officers and such a procedure be introduced. I just wondered if anybody knew whether that had been done or not.
I think I can say that is on her to-do list. I think that in terms of, there's been some significant resource pressures within the team, but I am aware that she has had those discussions with you, and that is something that she was going to be working on.
Thank you.
Just for clarity, could we clarify that refers to council employees' email accounts, just in case anyone was thinking that was any broader? Okay, that's all the questions I'd had intimated. Any further questions from anybody today? Great, I'll turn it over to any comments. Anyone wishing to make a comment on the paper? Good. Okay. So thank you very much, everyone. A good outing for that report. So are we happy to agree the recommendations of the report? Great, thank you. So next up we have the Corporate Workforce Plan 2021-23 Progress Report. And I believe it's yourself, is it, Lisa, who's introducing this one? Oh, sorry, Pauline. And you can use the lectern if you wish to, or you can speak from there, your own choice. Thank you.
Thank you. This paper is to give you an update on the Corporate Workforce Plan that was introduced in June 2021. It's a 2-year plan. It's due for a refresh in 23. Some of the activities that were contained within the report and the plan itself were disrupted due to COVID and resources being redirected. But this is just to give an update to Scrutiny on the activities that's been undertaken in the lifespan of this. We're halfway through of this activity in terms of the plan. It will be refreshed for June 23 in relation to any update from Transformation and Change and the corporate plan that's currently being revisited and hope to be approved at Council later this year. So the new plan will have those activities contained in it. The paper itself just sets out what we've been working on in terms of priorities, despite some activities being delayed, to give you a context of what we're actually doing to ensure that we've got people with the right skills with the right place to actually deliver the council services as appropriately. If there's any questions on the paper, I'm quite happy to take them.
Thank you for the introduction and thank you for the report. Do we have any questions? I don't have anything yet on the chat. Anyone wish to ask a question? Councillor Drysdale, please go ahead.
Thank you, Vice Convener. In the preamble to the report, it's indicated, unsurprisingly, that pre-existing skill shortages have been exacerbated by a combination of COVID and EU exit. I just wondered if we're looking here at an annual review of this whole plan. Are you able to say, comparing a year ago with now, what numbers of EU nationality staff were a year ago and what they are now?
Sorry, I don't have that actual information to hand in terms of economic development and the number of staff that we, within our communities, that we actually supported to get settled status. So I don't know in terms of the supply pool how many were in the labour market that are no longer in the labour market, but there is a national shortage of certain occupational groups, and the unemployment rate in Perth and Kinross has now reduced, which reduces our labour market even more in this area, and that's causing some difficulty with recruitment, but I don't have the information specifically.
Thanks. So maybe if I pose the question slightly differently, how many EU nationals has Perth and Kinross Council lost as staff in the last 12 months? And if you don't have that information, perhaps it could be provided to the committee thereafter. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll be able to provide that information. We did have that information when we were looking at our EU and who had identified as that. So I'll be able to provide that to committee.
Thank you. And if I might add, it might be good to have a comparator when that information is shared so that we have the overall staff turnover and then the turnover within groups from EU nationals, if that's acceptable to you, Councillor Drysdale. And then, sorry, Councillor Drysdale, did you have any other questions?
Not at the moment.
Councillor Massey, any question for you?
Thank you, Vice Convener. And on Appendix 1, I'd like to know a little bit more about job families, what they are and how many the council have at the moment. How many job families do they have at the moment? And what are job families? A little bit more understanding of that, please.
Job families are occupational groups on the Scottish and the single status local government employees. So there are different employment groups within the council, and within the main group, the single status group, we have got 12 job families that take in all varieties of technical, professional, general admin, social care type workers. So each of the groups have a skill set, a core area that is required for each of those roles that have been determined through our job evaluation process and are set out as a generic role, and so that we can move resource as and where required to meet business need. So it gives us flexibility, and there are 12 different groupings within that across that group.
Thank you for that. Can I ask another question? Within each family, are there different pay grades within each family group, or are they all at the same pay grade?
No, they're across the whole of the pay structure. So there's different gradings across the group together based on pay rates, but it also helps for employees to consider career development opportunities and how they can move from one area to the next in terms of their career progression. So it allows them to see what's required at each grade in terms of experience, knowledge or skills, so that that's something for them to aim for. But it does go up across the pay grade.
Thank you both. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Vice Convener. As a councillor, I get many calls asking me about planning and asking me about roads. And when I go into these services, I find that there is a lack of staff and there's an ever-evolving amount of people who are resigning. How are we actually tackling that? Have we got a plan in place to replace these people and get us up and active again?
We are working with the services where there are areas of shortage. Some of these areas are localised and some are national. And we have got a number of plans in place in terms of improving the recruitment, the chain, the supply, learning opportunities, actually growing our own. But perhaps Barbara might want to come in to talk about particular occupational groups.
Thank you, Pauline. Sort of as elected members are aware, then sort of there is a national shortage of HGV drivers, and as was discussed at EI and ED committee this morning, sort of particularly for things like roads maintenance, winter maintenance, and our refuse collection, we do have plans in place that we are implementing to try and recruit and retain in areas such as that. Engineering is a real difficulty across all our aspects of engineering, from mechanical, electrical and roads, structures, flooding and whatever. And again, that's a national issue and we are doing our very best to recruit to those posts as well, and offering sort of what are very attractive sort of opportunities, particularly in some engineering aspects where because the teams will be working on entire projects rather than bits of projects that they would do if they were in industry or in a more sort of out with non-council organisation as well. Planning, we've had difficulties there, but we are now recruiting and now we're fully up to speed with planning. And again, that's a national issue in areas such as that. And we have taken a very different approach to how we would want to recruit to those areas, looking at good practice in other areas, and that seems to be working for us as well. And then again, there's a national issue round about all our regulatory services such as environmental health, food safety, and that is, we're looking for a different way nationally to ensure that there is a throughput of officers or potential officers in those areas as well. So it is what we're doing locally. We are whatever means we can to recruit, we're doing, but nationally where there are issues, we're picking that up.
Does that address your question?
Can I just come back slightly on that? Yeah, we do seem to be losing an awful lot of people. And I'm told personally, and I hear from other people as well, that it's because they get better rates outside the council. One of the things that we are trying to do, I see from the report here, is describe individual career opportunities that exist in a positive and accessible manner. Are people being offered these opportunities? Are they leaving for better wages? Is there something underlying going on? Is that something that you're able to help us with?
Well, yes, sort of they are leaving because they're getting better salaries, particularly in the private sector. And you get to the point where, and Pauline can come in at the back of me on this one, is that we can only pay what our rates of pay allow us to do. We can implement or use market supplements, which we have done in the past, to mitigate that. But when speaking to some of our leavers about the offers that they've had from the private sector, there is absolutely no way we could match that. And in this current climate, then I think that there are also, sort of opportunities much wider afield for ex-members of staff because of hybrid working, home working arrangements, so that some have taken up opportunities in areas which they would not have considered before, again for a larger salary, but also because they've been able to work from home as well. So I think it's a combination of things, and we're really trying our hardest to be able to do that. We're also, sort of have got a good, significant and well-established track record in using graduate trainees, modern apprentices and other traineeships to encourage people to join us and to work their way up through the organisation, and that's quite successful, and we're looking at how we can use that more frequently as well.
Thank you for that, Barbara. And just one final thing. I'm encouraged. Did you say that planning was almost up to speed with staffing?
Yep. Yes, I did.
Good. I look forward
And
to that.
unless
Thank you.
I've been off for a week, so that might have changed. But no, that's because it does turn around quite quickly. But yes, I do believe we are.
Hopefully they're all still there. So next question to convener. Go ahead.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Towards the top of page 31 of our papers, we're mentioning that the corporate workforce plan needs to be able to respond to developments arising from transformation and change in the evolving Perth and Kinross offer. I was wondering if officers have any measure or grasp on how well embedded the principles of the offer and what the former chief executive referred to as a think yes approach. Or one might think of a can-do attitude. How well that's embedded, and whether you've got any measures in terms of whether communities feel supported in terms of the offer by staff because the can-do attitude is there.
Thanks, Convener. In terms of our cultural change programme and the employee offer experience, which we're still currently running, we've had around 1,500 staff undertake that process at the moment. And in terms of stats or feedback that we've had, I suppose the biggest one, which would be an indicator of understanding around the offer and the ethos, the principles, that think yes notion internally, would be when we start the experience, we ask on a scale of 1 to 10 what people know about the offer. It's generally anything between 1 and 3, and that's normally around about 70% of staff attending these sessions. By the end of it, between around about 70% would score between 8 and 10 in terms of that. So we know that we are establishing a much clearer understanding of our think yes, problem solving, values and behaviours, all of the things that would come along in terms of the principles of the offer. What I would say is we still have quite a bit to go. We've had around a quarter of the organisation, I think it's about 1,500 people in the organisation undertaking that. We are working with our Health and Social Care Partnership colleagues and our education colleagues to extend that number further. And we're continuing to go about our cultural change programme with transformation sessions. We're actively looking at these questions in terms of how we take any challenges forward, how we empower our staff and our communities in terms of that think yes. So we certainly are making progress in that area.
Okay, but we don't have a measure in terms of how supported communities feel by the offer or anything like that. You know, there's no feedback about whether, regardless of whether staff are aware of can-do attitude and problem solving, whether it's actually being implemented.
What I would say about that is we are out in communities at the moment as an EELT speaking to different community representatives. We are getting some qualitative data back from them about interactions that they have had lately with staff in the organisation, which in terms of the feedback that we've had has been positive. We don't gather that as a matter of course at the moment in terms of community feedback or all the different ways in which that would come into the organisation.
Thank you. And then Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Yeah, one of the significant factors impacting on ability to recruit is described as a challenging local housing market. I just wondered if we have, what data and evidence do we have to flesh that out, and is that an issue that is across the whole of Perth and Kinross, or is it perhaps more pronounced in rural locations, or just what evidence do we have around this aspect?
If I can come in, convener or vice convener.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so we are aware that, sort of in certain areas, there appears to be an issue around about the availability of housing. The housing team, sort of working with the planning team and the forward planning team are well aware of that and are looking at solutions to those problems. Clearly, sort of there are wider issues afoot, but sort of it is something, it tends to be much more rural areas, but we are looking at it and we'd hope to find where we possibly can solutions.
Thank you. And then I believe Sheena Devlin wishes to additionally add colour. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener. In response to Councillor Drysdale's question about specifics, where we have evidence, we know from work that we have done and continue to do with colleagues who may choose or not choose to come to Perth and Kinross to undertake their initial teacher qualification year. Probationers, a number of them may cite the fact that it's quite challenging to find affordable housing, and that's not just in relation to some of the more rural areas, but we also know from some colleagues who have moved to work in Perth and Kinross in education that they have found it quite challenging to find some accommodation in some of our more rural communities. So we do have that information. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the question, Councillor Drysdale. Anything further?
No, just simply a comment, if I may, just to say, we all in this chamber know how wonderful a place Perth and Kinross is to live, and I think it's incumbent upon us as a council to do anything that we possibly can to remove this obstacle and to attract high quality staff to the area. Thanks.
Okay, so I think we slipped into comments a little there, but we don't have any further questions intimated. So last chance for any questions. Okay, anybody else for any comments on the paper?
Yes, I think it would be following on from the questions that Ms. Skilled answered from me. It would be helpful to recommend that I note that the workforce plan is due to be revised in 2023, but it might be helpful at that point to look at measures where communities can, or measures where we can assess how embedded these can-do attitudes and transformational working practices are, and how supported communities feel by them. And the other point I would make is that this is a progress report on our workforce plan. I don't think it will fall to this committee to agree the next revision of the workforce plan. I think that would be a resources issue, and so it would go to the Finance and Resources Committee, and therefore I would suggest as a recommendation that we include that future updates are provided on the progress reporting are provided to the Finance and Resources Committee.
Okay, any further comments? We're happy to agree the paper, to note it and to pass that additional note as the convener suggests. Great, thank you. Back across to you then, convener, for the final item.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I wonder whether we should take a 7-minute recess so we can stretch legs. I'm looking at that will take us nicely to 4:15. Or do we? Sorry? Okay, until 4:15 to stretch legs, because I know that people are sitting behind. Not all of us, but some people are in particular sitting behind devices for a long period of time. So up and stretch legs for 7.5 minutes, 6.5 minutes. Okay, thanks very much. So that's us back in session as a committee now. I think we had indicated before the meeting that following this there would be a session on scrutiny reviews. And looking at the time and conscious of the invitation, well, the fact that people will have matters to attend to from 5 o'clock, and that there's also an invitation from Culture Perth and Kinross at 5. So it'd be my intention that the clerk to the committee will look for an alternative time to discuss scrutiny reviews and drop that in the calendar rather than doing it at the conclusion of this meeting, if that's all right with the committee. Yep, good. Okay, so the final item on the agenda today then, item 9 is the Perth and Kinross Council Annual Performance Report for 2021-22, and I think this is going to be introduced by Charlene Guild, who's our Head of Innovation, I want to say. Mrs. Guild.
Thank you, Convener. So we're pleased to introduce our 2021-22 Corporate Annual Performance Report this afternoon. Following Scrutiny and Performance Committee today, the report will then go on to full council on the 28th of September for approval. A few areas that I would just like to draw your attention to this year include the accessibility of the report having been increased this year, although the format is the same, with the focus on our 5 strategic objectives and an additional Organised to Deliver section which gives information on how our support services continue to provide best value. The report starts with a high-level summary that presents our highlights and challenges and how we propose to tackle them. Then each section provides some narrative around each objective. The relevant key performance indicators used to measure progress against our objectives are listed, and links to the Council's online performance dashboard, which is in keeping with our approach in previous years. We also need to note that direct comparisons of data pre and post-COVID should be treated with caution and may not be appropriate. The report highlights some of the positive achievements that we have made against our outcomes and is balanced by recognising some of the improvement areas for our organisation as we move forward. We have also included hyperlinks to other sources of performance information which provide more in-depth information within specific areas. Finally, as we move towards the introduction of a new corporate plan in December and the introduction of a new performance management framework, we will be changing the way we report in future, and we will come back to this committee for feedback, suggestions and ideas on how we can continually improve within the area of performance reporting. We are pleased to present this report and welcome questions and feedback at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Guild. Start with Bailey Ahern.
That's better. Yeah, my first question is an observation as well. Is this would only occur when there's a change of administration, but this is an annual performance report for 21 to 22. Yet the front is signed off by Councillor Lane, who's the council leader for a different administration, and I just wonder how he feels or how it's put forward that you've got the leader of a different administration signing off a performance report for the previous administration of a different party.
That's just a matter of fact. The current leader is the current leader, and the performance straddles a period when we had a previous administration. It's perfectly appropriate.
Okay, it just seems a bit strange that you've got somebody putting forward a report for somebody else, but fair enough. And the second question, and I realise this is a very high-level report, and it's about on page 50 of our pack, 36 of the actual report, and it's to do with the reducing offending. In the section there, it says about our safer community staff consult with the Scottish Prison Service to identify people who are about to be released and ensure they have the right supports in place. There is an issue at the moment across Scotland, and certainly with authorities that have prisons within their authorities, and we have too. And there is an issue when prisoners are released into Perth and Kinross. We're responsible for those that live and reside within Perth and Kinross, but where we have a maximum security prison and we release prisoners that may be from a different authority, we don't necessarily have the responsibility to look at their onward support going forward. And I don't know whether we should just clarify that sentence to ensure that, where it says to ensure they have the right supports in place. And I don't know how you change that to specify those that are resident in Perth and Kinross, and we have the support for them, whereas we have a particular issue where some authorities don't even know when they've got prisoners from their authority being released from prisons across Scotland. And I don't know whether there just should be some clarity in there.
Thanks. I think we have Mrs. Devlin, the Executive Director of Education and Children's Services, where criminal justice falls.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Councillor Hearn. I'm very happy to discuss with the Criminal Justice team and with Hazel Robertson, who heads that up, as to how we might make that nuanced but important piece of information more obvious in any future report. So I'm very happy to pick that up, Convener.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to refer to page 22 of the report, and it's about our children, young people, physically, mentally and emotionally healthy. And the report goes on to say that we've had 600 children, should I say, and young people have received one-to-one counselling support through the Counselling in Schools programme, which commenced in November 2020. I'm just trying to get a feel for how big the problem is. And if you just indulge me for a second, when I attended the CAP at Auchterarder, I spoke to 4 young children. They were 14, 15 years old. And I asked them what they thought would be most important for them in years to come. And they made, without any exception, all of them said extra support for mental well-being. And they made comment that there was only one person in the community school of Auchterarder looking after 800 people. So I'm just trying to get a feel for how big is the problem. We have 600 people that you're saying have had counselling. How many are on a waiting list? Just what is the problem? Is that something we can answer?
Mrs. Devlin again.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Councillor Allen. I'm interested in the feedback that you had from the 4 young people, and would be pleased to pick up on that in a wee bit more detail, because whilst we do have trained counsellors in every school, it's not only a trained counsellor who may support young people with an aspect of their health and well-being, because there's a whole spectrum of I suppose difficulty or degree of how serious or otherwise a problem might be. Some might be quite transient and others might be longer lasting. And of course, in response to the kind of difficulties that young people have, then a different response from a different professional would be appropriate. And so we have guidance staff, we have support for learning staff, we have class teachers. I think, in fact, at this committee, I've made the point before that everybody who works with our children and young people has a responsibility to provide appropriate support for them around their mental health, their well-being, their physical well-being as well. In terms of 600 young people accessing counselling, we have approximately 18,500 young people across our schools. So that 600 would represent a relatively small proportion of the total pupil population. And of course, beyond the kind of support that can be provided in schools, there's a range of other support services that are available that young people may be referred to that would not necessarily be based in schools. So to simply think that there's only one person for 800 young people in any school is actually not an accurate representation of the range and type of supports that are available. I've also mentioned that, you know, for children and young people for whom mental health and well-being is an issue, that's something that we do indeed take very seriously. And as I say, would seek to then invoke the most appropriate response at the most appropriate level for the duration of the time that a young person may experience that difficulty. We have said that we would be quite happy to undertake a presentation for all elected members, not just those associated with learning and families. I think it's sometime in December, in the lead up to when the National Health and Wellbeing Census data is made public, and we'd be happy to cover more information at that point, Councillor Allen, about the range and types of supports that are actually available. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm happy to help you with the kids in Auchterarder and their concerns.
Do we have any more questions from the committee?
Just following on from my last point, the next point on there was the Scottish Government Health and Wellbeing Census. It was completed successfully across all schools with 7,500 responses received from P5 to S6 pupils. The analysis given here is based on 7,500. How many were actually given the census when there were 7,500 responses? I just wonder if it's representative.
I'm happy to answer, convener.
Please.
I'm getting some feedback. Apologies. Councillor Allen, the census was available to all young people through primary 5, 6, 7 and S1 to S6. And I don't know the number of the pupil population off the top of my head in that cohort, but I can certainly find that out. However, what we do know is that 7,500 is statistically significant in terms of responses, and therefore we are able to use the responses that we've had to help us inform future policy and support and resource provision. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions, or I might have one or two. I was just wondering if anybody knows, in terms of our strategic objective on the prosperous, sustainable, inclusive economy, Perth was designated UNESCO City of Craft and Folk Art in November 21. Obviously, we were all pleased to receive that designation. I just wondered how much we had done to capitalise on that in the what's that, roughly 9 months since.
If I can come in, convener.
Yes, Executive Director Renton.
Yes, sorry, I was just checking to see whether Fiona Robertson was still joined into the meeting, but she's not. I understand that there's quite a lot of work that has been undertaken, but I don't have the details, but we can provide that to committee.
Thanks very much. And in the same section, we launched the latest round of or the relevant round in that financial year of the Micro Enterprise Fund in May 2021. I think it's really heartening to see the range of businesses that were supported. I'll just read it out for the benefit of the public, because I'm sure nobody's online following word for word the report. Fund a range of industries including indoor climbing centres, dry stone masons, beauty salons, restaurants, and allow local businesses to expand and grow and benefited them when most needed following the pandemic. I mean, these are all factual points, you know, the 126 applications, the value of £115,900. But I just wondered, in terms of performance, do we know, I have seen in previous years surveys of the businesses who benefited, and I guess this kind of reflects what I was getting at on the previous paper, but what, you know, in terms of successful performance management, how many of these businesses have, you know, survived? What was the feedback from them in terms of, you know, in terms of ease of access to the micro enterprise fund, or, you know, how crucial was it for them at that point in time? Do we have any of that information?
And again, convener, if I can come in, unfortunately, I don't have that information to hand, and there's no one here, just for a number of reasons from the economic development team. But again, we can try and provide that information for committee.
Okay, thank you, Director Renton. And it's not necessarily a specific point about the micro enterprise fund, although I mean I have a particular interest in it. But I think the wider point, or sorry, that point could be amplified into a sort of wider focus in terms of actually, admittedly, as the head of innovation said, you know, we'll be looking to refresh the way that this information is presented in future. So it might be useful to have that sort of focus in future in terms of actually getting feedback from the people that use the services, incorporating that and measuring that and establishing the parameters, not just for the micro enterprise fund, as I say. Have we got any other questions from the committee or any comments? More questions? Councillor Allen.
Hiya. Strategic objective, educated, responsible and informed citizens on page 27 of the 64. It's 13 on the report. It says that there was targeted work undertaken with identified schools to support improvement in reading, etc. And it says that 6 early years settings were supported to successfully target improved outcomes in maths and numeracy. Can you tell me about the success of that and whether we're going to expand it from 6 early years? And related to that, under the case studies, the one about STEM pilot numeracy programme suggests that they're better informed, but it doesn't say there's been an improvement in standards. Just wonder if we can just get some answers to that. Thank you.
Is that one for Director Devlin?
I'm happy to take that question.
Sharon Johnson, please. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Allen. There was a number of different pieces of work undertaken throughout COVID and indeed in this year as well, in relation to looking at improving our outcomes for children and young people. And there had been an identified area within early years as a result of COVID that our communication and literacy skills of our children in nurseries was being impacted. And so therefore a number of pilot projects were undertaken by the early years team. The one that is mentioned on page 27 was a number of literacy programmes that were undertaken in conjunction with speech and language therapists, and were also undertaken as part of an improvement methodology project where we were looking to measure the impact of any interventions that we were putting in place. Also the case study in terms of the STEM case study within the report is another example of an improvement methodology pilot where we looked to develop particular aspects of literacy and specific interventions that we were using and measuring the impact of those. And so those interventions were evaluated and were deemed to be very successful. And so the next plan and iteration of that is that we roll that out. But what we wanted to do was to test those interventions in a small number of schools to see if they were making a difference. And in fact, to answer your last question about was there an improvement, there was indeed an improvement in literacy and communication and indeed in numeracy within the case study that you mentioned at a later date. and our data that just came through in terms of our milestones has shown that there has been an improvement in those areas. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. And was there any move to move it beyond 6 early years?
Yes, that's right. So once that we had a look at whether those interventions were successful, we are indeed rolling that out.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any further questions from the committee. So comments, any more feedback to provide? Okay, so can we agree that we have scrutinised and commented as appropriate on the annual performance report for 21-22? Agreed. Thank you very much. That concludes the business for this afternoon. Thank you to all elected members and for your attendance, and to officers for being here to introduce the papers and answer questions and ensure in the background the smooth running of the meeting. Thank you.